Omar Al-Fahad and Layla Hassan's wedding promised love, luxury, and a lifetime of happiness. But by sunrise, the billionaire groom's obsession turned deadly, leaving the bride's blood on gold and a city drowning in scandal. The crime scene presents a new page of crime, a new mystery, a new shock case. Omar Al-Fahad's wedding was the kind of event that made the entire city stop and stare. Riyadh had seen plenty of lavish ceremonies before, but nothing compared to the billionaire's display of power and prestige that night. The sky lit up with fireworks shaped like hearts. 1,000 roses lined the marble staircase, and the air reeked of expensive perfume and champagne. Guests whispered in awe, snapping photos of the golden couple as they walked through a sea of flashing lights. Omar, 32, tall and razor-sharp in his custom white tuxedo, carried himself like a man who owned the world. His bride, Layla Hassan, was the definition of elegance, draped in a diamond-studded gown worth more than most people's homes, her smile delicate but unreadable. Everyone believed this was love at its purest form, a fairy tale written in gold, but beneath the polished surface, nothing was as it seemed. Layla wasn't born into money or luxury. She was a woman who had built herself from the ground up, hiding scars no one could see. Omar, for all his wealth, was a man who measured loyalty like currency, obsessed with control and reputation. The wedding wasn't just a celebration. It was a transaction of power, a social merger between beauty and dominance. Layla had told herself it was worth it. The fame, the comfort, the security, but as she stood beside him under the chandelier glow, a strange chill ran down her spine. Something about his grip felt too tight, his smile too rehearsed. Cameras caught every second, but no lens could capture the silent tension between them. As the music swelled and the world cheered, Layla looked around at the glittering crowd, unaware that she was already standing on the edge of her own destruction. The reception carried on like a dream, but behind the luxury, cracks were already forming. Omar's eyes followed Layla all night, not with love, but with suspicion masked as pride. Every man who smiled at her, every whisper that reached her ear, sparked something dark inside him. His reputation was everything, and he'd spent years building a spotless image as the charming billionaire prince who had it all. But beneath that charm, he was paranoid, possessive, and dangerously insecure. Layla, on the other hand, was fighting to fit into a world that didn't want her. The elite women of Riyadh whispered about her past, how she wasn't from a powerful family, how her rise from a modest background felt too fast, too mysterious. She brushed it off, clinging to the hope that Omar's love could silence the gossip, but the murmurs reached the wrong ears. As the night went on, an old acquaintance of Layla's appeared, a man from her past life, one who knew too much. He congratulated the couple, but the way he looked at Layla didn't sit right with Omar. His jaw tightened, and the atmosphere shifted. The music faded into background noise as his thoughts spiraled into jealousy and rage. When the man disappeared into the crowd, Omar's mind was already consumed by suspicion. He didn't speak, didn't smile. He just watched Layla dance, every laugh she let out sounding like a betrayal in his head. The moment the reception ended, he was done pretending. The guests saw a perfect couple walking toward their honeymoon suite, but what they didn't see was the storm brewing in Omar's chest. By the time the doors closed behind them, the fairy tale wedding had turned into a ticking time bomb, and Layla had no idea that her husband's love was about to turn lethal. Inside the lavish honeymoon suite, the atmosphere was suffocating despite the soft glow of golden chandeliers and the faint scent of roses lingering in the air. Layla tried to breathe, tried to believe the tension was nothing more than post-wedding exhaustion, but Omar's silence was deafening. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, staring at the reflection of the city lights through the window, his thoughts running wild. The words of that man from earlier, his lingering stare, his sly smile, kept echoing in Omar's mind, twisting into something venomous. He couldn't shake the image of Layla's past coming back to stain his perfect reputation. In his world, appearances were everything, and the idea of being mocked by others because of his wife's secrets was unbearable. Layla, sensing the shift, approached him carefully, hoping to ease the tension, but her movements only fueled his paranoia. He started asking questions that sounded harmless at first, but the tone carried accusation and anger just beneath the surface. The more she tried to explain, the more his imagination ran off the rails. His face hardened, his words sharpened, and his body language screamed hostility. The room that had once been a symbol of romance now felt like a cage. Layla's heartbeat quickened, her instincts screaming that something was wrong, but it was too late. Omar's obsession with control, his need to dominate, had crossed into something darker. The night dragged on with a dangerous silence, the kind that settles right before a storm. Outside, the city glimmered in luxury and calm, but inside that penthouse, love had turned into suspicion, and suspicion had curdled into rage. What started as a fairy tale wedding was morphing into a nightmare, and by the time dawn threatened the horizon, Layla's fate was already sealed by her husband's growing madness. The hours crept past midnight, and the golden suite that once symbolized new beginnings now reeked of tension and fear. Omar sat on the edge of the bed, his knuckles white from gripping a glass too tightly, his mind replaying every rumor he'd ever heard about Layla. He couldn't stop picturing her laughing with other men, whispering secrets she never told him. Each thought poured gasoline on the fire of his paranoia until it consumed whatever logic he had left. Layla tried to calm him down, her voice trembling as she insisted that her past didn't define her, that she had nothing to hide. But Omar's ego had already taken the driver's seat. To him, every word she said sounded like a lie, every tear like manipulation. The man who once promised her the world now looked at her like a stranger who had trespassed into his empire. His anger wasn't loud. It was cold, calculating, and terrifying. He began throwing questions at her, rapid and sharp, each one cutting deeper. When she hesitated, it only confirmed his worst fears. His mind blurred the lines between reality and imagination until he truly believed she had humiliated him. He wanted control, wanted to make her pay for the betrayal that existed only in his head. The first sign of violence came sudden and brutal, a flash of rage that left Layla stunned and gasping. The impact shattered the silence, followed by a flood of sobs and broken pleas. But Omar wasn't hearing her anymore. In that moment, he wasn't a husband. He was a man possessed by pride and fury, driven by the toxic idea that love meant ownership. Outside, the night was calm and peaceful, but inside that suite, something irreversible had begun. The wedding night had turned into a crime scene in the making. The screams never reached beyond the suite's thick walls, muffled by expensive carpets and heavy drapes, leaving the illusion of perfection intact for anyone passing by. Omar's rage exploded into violence, years of entitlement and control boiling over in seconds. Layla tried to protect herself, stumbling across the marble floor, her wedding gown torn and smeared with blood and tears. Every time she pleaded, it only fueled his fury, twisting his love into hatred. To him, she wasn't the woman he married hours ago. She was a symbol of shame, a reminder of every fear that someone might laugh at him behind his back. The night blurred into chaos as objects shattered, perfume bottles cracked against walls, and the scent of roses mixed with something metallic and horrifying. Layla's fight weakened as she realized the man she thought she could change was a monster beneath the mask of wealth and charm. Omar's voice grew deeper, more erratic, filled with venom as he hurled accusations about betrayal, dishonor, and lies. The luxury around them, the golden curtains, crystal chandeliers, silk sheets, became witnesses to an unspeakable act. He hit her until the rage burned out, until silence filled the room like a ghost. When it was over, Omar stood motionless, staring at what he had done, his breath ragged, his hands trembling. The once immaculate suite looked like a war zone, and Layla's lifeless body lay draped across the floor, her wedding ring catching the dim light in eerie contrast to the brutality of her death. For a moment, Omar felt nothing, no guilt, no panic, just emptiness. Then, like a tidal wave, the realization hit him. The perfect life he had built, the image he protected, had just been destroyed by his own hands. The billionaire prince of Riyadh had become a killer on his wedding night. The morning sun crept into the penthouse, painting everything gold, but the beauty of the dawn only made the horror more surreal. Omar stood in the middle of the suite, his shirt torn, his face pale and expressionless, surrounded by the wreckage of his own rage. Layla's body lay still, the blood dried against the white marble, her diamond bracelet glinting under the light like a cruel reminder of the life she had just begun to live. For the first time, reality hit him, not as guilt, but as panic. He wasn't just a man who lost control. He was a public figure, a billionaire whose name sat on the front page of every magazine in the Gulf. Scandal was poison in his world, and this was the kind that could destroy everything. The thought of his empire crumbling, of the whispers that would spread across Riyadh and Dubai, made his chest tighten. He rushed to clean up the room, scrubbing bloodstains with towels, smashing her phone, and flushing away anything that could link him to what happened. But no matter how much he cleaned, the suite still smelled of violence. He called his trusted bodyguard, Faisal, a man who had handled Omar's darkest secrets before. When Faisal arrived, his eyes went wide, but his loyalty overpowered his conscience. Together they wrapped Layla's body in a white sheet, carried her down the private elevator, and loaded her into a luxury SUV parked underground. Every movement was mechanical, efficient, practiced like it wasn't the first time they'd hidden something ugly. By sunrise, Omar had the suite cleaned, the staff paid to keep quiet, and a plan already forming in his head. To the world, Layla would disappear quietly, just another rumor swallowed by the desert. But the truth had a way of refusing to stay buried. Faisal drove through the quiet outskirts of Riyadh as the city slept, the luxury SUV gliding down the empty highway like a ghost. Omar sat in the back seat, staring blankly at the desert horizon, his mind spinning in a haze of disbelief and denial. Layla's body, wrapped neatly in the white sheet, lay in the trunk, the final piece of a story that was supposed to be perfect. The desert stretched endlessly before them, silent and merciless, just like the world Omar had built around himself. Faisal didn't speak. He knew better. His loyalty was paid for in millions, but even he could feel the chill of what they were doing. When they reached a secluded patch of dunes miles away from the city, they stopped. The stars above were bright and indifferent, watching two men dig a grave for a woman who had once been the symbol of beauty and grace. The sound of shovels scraping sand echoed in the stillness, mixing with Omar's ragged breathing. He wasn't crying. He couldn't. He had crossed a line where emotion no longer existed, only fear and survival. When they were done, Omar stood over the shallow grave, looking down at the sheet as if expecting her to move. He muttered something under his breath, maybe a prayer or an apology, but the desert swallowed it whole. They covered her quickly, leaving no trace of what had happened, no sign that the golden couple of Riyadh had ended in blood and sand. As they drove back, the sun began to rise, casting light over the endless dunes. For a brief second, Omar convinced himself he could outrun what he had done, that money and power could bury guilt as easily as a body. But deep down, he knew the desert never keeps secrets forever. Days turned into weeks, and Omar's world began to crumble behind the facade of wealth and control. He had covered every track, silenced every witness, and paid off the hotel staff. But guilt has a strange way of showing up even when no one else does. At first, he thought he could live normally, hosting business meetings, smiling for the press, pretending his wife had left for a private trip. But soon, whispers started circling. Layla's friends began asking questions. Her family grew suspicious, and the media caught wind of her sudden disappearance. Omar tried to manipulate the narrative, claiming she had mental health struggles, that she'd fled the country for peace of mind, but no one bought it completely. The police began poking around quietly, and when one officer noticed inconsistencies in his timeline, the empire he'd built on lies started to crack. Faisal grew restless, drinking heavily, haunted by what they'd done. One night, unable to take it anymore, he confessed everything to a close friend, hoping it would ease his conscience. But that friend leaked the story. Within hours, it spread like wildfire across social media. Reporters camped outside Omar's mansion, and the once untouchable billionaire found himself surrounded by flashing cameras and police sirens. He tried to escape to Dubai on his private jet, but the authorities were already waiting. The arrest sent shockwaves across Saudi Arabia, turning one of its most admired figures into a monster in the public eye. In court, Omar sat stone-faced as the prosecution laid out every detail: the affair accusations, the violence, the cover-up in the desert. When the verdict came, guilty of murder, he didn't flinch. But late at night in his prison cell, the silence returned, louder than ever. In the dark, he could still hear Layla's voice, soft and broken, echoing in the spaces where his empire used to stand.